That's risky, too risky for me. I'm going to play it safe. It's what we hear all the time. Risk, beware, avoid it, at least minimize it. Is that really right? How the heck do I even know what safe is? I got to ask myself, why can't risk be my friend? Like, hey, that's risky. I wonder what great opportunities it might provide. Does risk have to be a foe? Maybe it can help make us all better. Risk isn't good or bad, it just is. It's a lot like gravity. Around us always and everywhere. Understanding it, managing it, and designing around it. That's the key. So let's get back to gravity for a moment. A feared foe sometimes, like when I stumbled down a staircase and forgot to mitigate the risk by grabbing the banister, but a treasured and constant friend too, like hydropower. Gotta love that FCRPS, go gravity. Risk is something to be understood, managed, leveraged to create value. Know what you want, let your imagination go wild, thinking about what could happen, and then engineer the outcome you want. Don't think of risk as an after the fact result, but as a design objective. Embrace risk. And no, that's not the same as betting big. It's actively designing the future you want.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the laughter through thick and through thin, for public power enthusiasts without and within. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on. Roll on, enthusiasts, roll on.
I'm Paul Dockery, the co-host of Public Power Underground and Senior Manager of Energy Resource Strategy and Planning for Seattle City Light.
And I'm Ahlmahz Negash, the co-host of Public Power Underground and Power Planner for Tacoma Power.
Joining Ahlmahz and I as this week's celebrity guest stars are Kevin Nordt and Paul Dietz.
Kevin Nordt is the Chief Resource Officer for Grant County Public Utility District. Prior to his current role, he served at Grant County as its Chief Executive Officer, Chief Financial Officer, and Director of Power Management. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, thank you, Ahlmahz, and thank you, Paul. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Love Public Power Underground. Always the highlight of my day when a new episode comes out. And I really look forward to, new episodes coming forward. It's really a lot of fun and I learned so much. So thanks for the opportunity to be part of this.
That means a lot, Kevin. It means a lot. When we first introduced this with our news data folks, we said we want to be like the friends that are showing up at your door when you refresh your app. So it feels good that you at least enjoy it when the new app comes up or the new episodes come out.
That's
right on. I think you hit the mark for sure.
Good. Well, joining Ahlmahz, Kevin, and I is Paul Dietz. Paul works at Grant County PUD as its Manager of Enterprise Risk Management. Paul, can I call you Mr. Dietz?
You can call me anything you want.
Okay.
Yeah, this is two Pauls on the show. I'm used to this at Tacoma Power. Everybody's named Chris for some reason. There's like every department, but here are two Pauls. Mr. Dietz, just so that we can distinguish between the two of you.
We can. Again, I'll respond to anything. But Paul, I didn't give you a great long bio. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your experience and how you come to us on Public Power Underground?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm happy to be here, Paul. I'm a frequent listener of the podcast, and now I get to be a contributor on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, strategic risk management. I've been working with energy risk management for quite a while now, helping utilities understand the complexities of fully integrated two-settlement markets, kind of like what we're seeing today as we're contemplating the EIM and the EDAM, also Markets Plus. For me, my career started a long time ago with PJM Part 1, pardon my French, the dawn of MISO, PJM Part 2, the rise of ERCOT, Esprit de SPP, and now Le Voyage West.
Nice. You take French in high school.
Russian. Nice. But it rhymes. So I'm a professional economist specializing in mathematical modeling, the kind that concerns itself with decision making with uncertainty. It's cool stuff, and it's kept me busy for sure. Oh, and on a personal detail, I started playing D&D in the late 1970s while I was growing up in suburban Chicago. And the biggest treat that we ever had was going up to visit Gary Gygax and buying dice from the very store where the whole thing was created. So it's
No
kind of,
way.
yeah, it's super cool.
Well, that's great foreshadowing because we're going to have a little D&D prep work later on in the episode. But before we get there, this is a term of art. So I'm an electric market enthusiast. Two settlement markets. That's a great term of art for these things. It's not part of the normal references that I hear, but two settlement markets. That's a great way to define these things. And are we talking about settling twice, once in day ahead and once in real time? Or are we talking settling twice, one for the gen and one for the load? What's the two settlement refer to?
Yeah, that's giving you the best shot you have to manage your risk up front and the day ahead. So most people go ahead and they bid in most of their portfolio into the day ahead market. It's the most relaxed setting that you can get before the excitement of the real time happens. So
there we go. And
you're framing
it as excitement and opportunity. So Kevin, I think this is on brand. This feels right.
Yeah, right on. No, it's Paul's a great enthusiast, and embrace the change and see where it can take us.
Okay, well, let's get into it. On Public Power Underground, we talk about the electric utility enthusiasm trifecta of electrification, markets, and people. On today's episode of Public Power Underground, we're talking about managing market risk with utility risk managers. We'll talk about risk from a variety of perspectives. Ahlmahz will ask an unscripted question in the segment we call Ahlmahz's Insightful Question of the Week. And we'll set up an energy-inspired Dungeons and Dragons campaign as foreshadowed by Mr. Dietz. Then we'll close it out with closing thoughts from Paul Dietz. But before we get started, a quick word from our presenting sponsor.
Energy Northwest is proud to provide clean, abundant, and reliable energy to help meet our growing needs. Energy Northwest is proudly advancing the Northwest's clean energy future.
I knew that.
Yeah, of course.
I knew that. They also have a great training program, which isn't in this promo, but I'll just provide it as a promo as well. They have a great internship program where college graduates can get an internship through Energy Northwest. I've talked about it many times on this podcast. I'm a big fan of that program. Wasn't in this ad read. They didn't write it in, but I'm just inserting it because I'm such a big fan.
All right. Well, sign up, boys and girls. Learn more about nuclear energy and its full potential at energy-northwest.com. That's energy-northwest.com.
Okay, Ahlmahz, why don't you kick off the discussion?
All right. So we hope to talk about 4 elements of managing risk as an electric utility. First, putting uncertainty into perspective. Second, organizational and customer risk tolerance. Third, we'll talk about translating that risk tolerance into strategies for risk management. And finally, risk-based thinking in the context of power supply. So to get us started, Paul, Mr. Dietz, can you share with us your thoughts about uncertainty as a risk manager for a load-serving entity with large hydro resources?
Oh, geez, that's a big topic. Where do you begin? It's possible to be so frightened by risk that you're like a scared rabbit or deer. You just freeze, and that's really not the way that we would necessarily want to run a utility. There's risk all around us, particularly in the Pacific Northwest. You can see changes in the volume of water as maybe one of the biggest drivers of risk that we have. It's volumetric supply of power is it takes a lot of time and energy and effort to manage that. And there are lots of techniques that you can employ to do that. That we use at Grant County routinely. So that's kind of a cool way of thinking about risk. Hey, we're in control of at least the amount of risk that we want to take.
Yeah, Kevin, so you talked about this engineering of risk. Can you give us a little bit more around that, putting it into perspective and the mechanisms maybe as you approached when you entered Grant County PUD, how you approached that with your board and with your customers?
Yeah, sure. Love to, right? And, there's a catchy little phrase, the meat of risk management that I heard from a fellow, Chris Davenport. I want to give him credit. And I'll loop that in here, right? But, like when I came into Grant, which is a wonderful place, and it's been a wonderful home for me for many, many years now, it became clear to me that they were relatively risk averse, but the strategies employed were extraordinarily risky, right? And it was just kind of, hey, this doesn't add up, right? Now, they were perceived to be, low risk, but coming back to, the concept of uncertainty, this, that, or the other thing may occur. What you think you're protecting yourself against, is maybe not the dimensions that are going to hit you, right? And so, well, how do we change, especially with a new person coming in? Hey, let's start to get our arms around.
Before you dig in, if you don't mind, before you dig into like how you dealt with it, then can you if you don't mind, give the specific example? Because in like hydro planning and hydro uncertainty, we think a lot about like critical water planning as a great mitigant for hydro risk, but and was that one of the elements that you were dealing with when you first got to Grant? Is that, can you give that specific example?
Right, hydro risk definitely was there, and at the time they were employing a very intense critical water type planning methodology, maybe even subcritical, which resulted in purchasing ahead in most years and foregoing potential sales, etc., which was just resulting in not reducing your risk so much, just skewing the power cost outcome that was there. So if what you were really after was to sort of bring those tails in, that was not a strategy. And through discussions and just plain English, it became very clear. We don't want to be whipped around. Okay, well then let's solve that problem, right? Because whether you plan for high water, low water, whatever, if you're not dealing with the variability, that's not changing the underlying distribution. It's just maybe changing what your economic outcome may be to in a way that was biased, right? And so that was really, really it.
I think this is an important point, because one way we think about managing risk is just changing where we plan to on our distribution of outcomes. And the way you're articulating it is this engineering of risk is actually trying to shorten or mitigate the tails. Am I synthesizing that framework?
Yes, I think
right?
You've got it. I think you've got it, bang on.
Okay.
What's worked well for me, and I think is a good way to go, is really, again, if I think of risk as uncertainty, right? There's a downside, but there may, there's upside too. Now, what is it I might want to bear, and what can I do about it? Which takes me to my meat, the meat of the risk sandwich, right? I can mitigate, I can eliminate, I can accept, or I can transfer, right? But fundamentally to me, if what I'm trying to do is, reduce the uncertainty, then that's what I need to focus on. If I am just looking and saying, well, hey, I want to bias the odds of the same outcomes one way or another, so that the probability of this occurring versus that appears to be slightly different, right? Well, what if I plan for average water? Well, I'll have more frequent times where I'm going to have a rate chew up versus if I plan for 25 percentile, right? But if I haven't done anything to change the underlying exposure, then, knowingly or not, I have chosen to, the A and the meat there. And so, knowing what it is you're trying to do, what would I like my outcome to be? I'd like it to be a lot tighter. Somebody else may say, I don't care about that. But hey, at Grant, we wanted things tighter. So then let's work on strategies that would, make the probabilities of extreme events that much smaller. And that's what we embarked on.
Yeah, so I think that's like kind of the first question of like understanding the paradigm for your uncertainty. Let's transition to risk tolerance. I want to get to how to do that from a power supply perspective, the shrinking your uncertainty. But we got the risk tolerance topic next. So why don't you transition us on that?
Yeah, let's transition from thinking about uncertainty to actually discerning risk tolerance as an organization. And an area I'd like to particularly focus on is how utilities can have that internal discussion to correctly identify their own risk tolerance as an enterprise, and also how they can discern their customers' risk tolerance, and then how the two interact for a public power monopoly utility. So Kevin, well, why don't you start us off?
Okay. And I know Paul will have a lot to add. So, I guess what I would say here, to start, it comes down to me to what I would say. It's not about, geeks bearing equations, right? And I think a lot of times that gets lost where, hey, tell me what tail var you want, or tell me, what C var you want, or earnings at risk, or, measures like that. And you're often talking with customers or board members or others that, are not, not familiar with that jargon or something, right? So really getting down to plain English and just sort of saying, what do you want to see? What might you be scared of? What don't you want to happen? Can I draw a picture or something, right? I found that's been a great way to go, because if we're back to, normal people talking to geeks bearing equations, a lot of times it's just this mess. And then, we really don't understand where we're at. And then it's, oh my God, how did we get here? So, what is it you might want to see? I like to try to elicit that in English. And then, hey, we'll try to convert that to a strategy that'll get you that outcome. That seems pretty simple, and it is, but it's a step I feel that's often neglected. And, that puts you at peril if you don't know what it is you want your outcomes to get to be. You may not get to fully where you want them to be, but if you don't know and don't have that clearly articulated, you're just adrift in space at that point.
Yeah, there's this saying, I think at the heart of it is like the true genius is explaining things simply and clearly. Like that's the heart of genius. So, Mr. Dietz, can you explain clearly like how to translate geeks bearing equations into plain English? And in the way, I think at the heart of what I'm really curious about y'all's perspective on is how to get this from customers. Because I do think that is a unique, like we're very good at talking to ourselves, but at the heart of understanding risk tolerance for a public power monopoly utility is making sure we are reflecting our customers' risk preferences. Go.
Yeah, my mentor was he did the service. He said if you can't explain complicated topics like risk in ways that most people could understand, then you haven't really done your job. So that was always his challenge. I might toss out equations and talk about stochastic calculus and and how we differentiate an objective function. But to be honest with you, it comes right down to most customers will tell you that they want to have reasonably stable and somewhat predictable rates. So that there's an objective right there. What really excites people more than anything is when their bills change, and they don't have to change that much to get a reaction. So, typically the way that we look at this is, in the end, your revenues and expenses need to produce some kind of stability and predictability in the ultimate result, which is how does that translate into stable and predictable rates.
I'm just curious. So that's very common sense right there. That ultimately people are worried about the dollar, like what's the bill at the end of the month. I think about companies like Gritty in Texas that took a gamble that customers were interested in exposing themselves to real-time prices in order to get a deal. It was cheaper.
Sure.
you know, in the short term, right? But then something catastrophic happens, and you realize that you opened yourself up to a risk that you didn't realize how big it was.
How big it can
Um,
get.
so I'm curious. Do you think that customers I don't want to sound condescending and say, do you think customers really understand the potential risk in all the different options and utilities? But just yeah, I'm getting back to Paul's question, like how do we help customers understand what risks are?
Yeah.
And as we try to do such, you know, different innovative, interesting new things as we're decarbonizing the grid moving forward. Like how do we get them to understand that?
That's a great question, Ahlmahz, and also you give a really good example. People might have said, "Hey, we thought that we understood. We were only exposed to price." But the fact of the matter is, they learned later on that there was a systematic risk that was built into ERCOT's system. You know, as they started shutting down the grid in response to grid emergencies, they were also shutting down the power to the very pumps that were pumping natural gas to the natural gas generators that were generating electricity. So suddenly you had to trip your plants off, and it was a self-sustaining issue that eventually created the crisis. So I would venture to guess that those customers, you know, felt like they had an understanding of the risk that they were bearing, but in fact they didn't. And so not only is it important that you're able to communicate that to them, but that you're also telling them something that's factually true. So it's up to the utility to do its job to make sure that the risks are properly identified and communicated. Then it's up to the customers to say, hey, this is how tolerant I am to changes in my underlying cost of electricity. So there's kind of a give and take. There's an opportunity for us as risk managers to put ourselves in their shoes and you know, try to get at that nugget. What kind of variability can you tolerate in your budget? I think you might find that you can put customers into different classifications, kind of depending on where they're at in life. Older people with fixed income may not be as risk tolerant as younger people, able to deal with a lot more variability. So you know, there is a consumer preference for that. And again, you know, from my perspective, it all translates to variability in revenue and variability in expense. 9 times out of 10, utilities are really focusing a lot of their attention on the expense part, which is, you know, where long-term planning comes into play. But you might be surprised to find out that you could have variability in the revenue side as well, particularly if you have customers who are who are more elastic and able to go into other territories at a drop of a hat compared to ones who are more fixed. So these are some of the random variables that we have to deal with when we think about overall risk to rates.
If I might add, Boz, you know, and not in any way to be condescending to, you know, customers. And I think, you know, if we think of, you know, the average family out there or so, you know, smaller customers, smaller businesses, you know, they're not energy, you know, experts. And I do think, you know, again, coming back to my theme of plain English and talking to folks through surveys and others, especially in public power, where we are such open process, right? But if I look at the gritty situation, right, there is, you know, an opportunity to get lower prices. But let me just ask you, if your bill was to quadruple in any month, would that be okay to you, right? And probably a lot of folks would have said, oh, heck no, right? And, you know, again, if you're coming in talking, you know, a lot of jargon and, you know, well, it's a, you know, heavy-tailed world we live in, and da 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 da. But are you okay with, you know, the leptokurtosis, you know, in the distribution? Nobody knows what you're talking about, right? But, you know, again, and, you know, I think this really falls on leadership at the utility and such. Hey, I'm talking to my customers, anybody, you know, how comfortable might you be, you know, if something falls off the rail. Well,
It,
do we
it,
know
that,
that's going to happen? Maybe we don't. But what if it did, right? And and I think talking that way so people can understand what the possibilities are is really powerful.
I agree. I agree. And part of the reasons, and I guess we can jump off from this to the next topic later. But I just wanted to add this one thing. Rates is something that's super interesting to me. And like for years, I've looked at designing all of the fanciest rates to incentivize customers to do one thing or the other. But at the end of the day, that like their risk management is a feature of a flat rate, right? So people don't have to worry about, and sometimes I have to remind myself that as I'm thinking about new different types of rates, I have to figure out how to keep that feature still within even the fanciest rates that are trying to incentivize other things. Like we can very easily lose that when we move away from flat retail rates. Anyway, I've gotten off my soapbox, Paul.
Well, before you roll forward, because I think I wanted to follow on that point
Sure.
exactly. Gritty is a specific type of transfer of risk where they're transferring two types of risk. They're transferring volume and price risk. And I think we all need to reflect as utilities, and we're all electric utility enthusiasts here, but on what we do when we transfer that volume risk through a volumetric rate. So when you talk about the risk of like quadrupling your bill, that is actually the experience of some customers in the base case on a fixed dollar per kilowatt hour charge. They will quadruple in some instances from summer to winter months. And the Gritty example is just an extreme where it's probably not quadruple, it's 10 times because they're experiencing both the volumetric risk of increased loads because it's cold, plus the price risk because the market is also experiencing a wide cold snap. So they're experiencing that volatility of price as well. Gritty is a grift, but we also need to think about as electric utility enthusiasts, making sure we're communicating that volumetric risk to our customers and making sure we're not just transferring that risk blindly, making sure if we can provide value in mitigating that risk for our customers to provide predictability of their bill, not just their rate, that we should.
That sure
That was
sounds like
my
coherence.
soapbox.
Yep. And so if I might say, it's communicating is super important, at least, from my perspective, and hearing and taking that. And I'll come back to this idea of designing the outcome, right? So if I'm hearing from somebody collectively that, we want predictable and stable results, and, our current situation may be where, hey, you're going to see your bill be 3 times higher in the winter than the summer. But that's not what you want. Well, then we, as electric utility enthusiasts, right, we have the opportunity to say, well, let's change the product we're offering to the customer so that they could get that price outcome they want. Now, they may say, well, I don't like my summer rate going up. Well, hey, look, there's no free lunch, and we have to explain that, right? But that's where I think really having that ongoing dialogue of, what is it you want? If what you want is mitigate the downside and keep the upside and don't pay for that, who doesn't, right? But that is not reality, right? But here is what it would cost to get you the outcome you say you seek. Are you really willing to pay for that? But again, that I think is a real key thing, in that, we're not stuck with the hand we're dealt. Every day, we can think about changing the hand up to and including buying and selling resources in the long run or whatever. So I think that's a really powerful tool.
I don't want to actually transition off this quite yet, because I want to get back to the heart of this question, which is assessing risk tolerance. So like there are utilities, and I think it is probably a utility best practice to survey your customers fairly regularly to figure out how if they appreciate the customer service and that kind of thing. How do you have any best practices, Mr. Dietz, our genius communicator of risk, about how to communicate effectively exactly what Kevin just described, which is this ability to provide you certainty month to month, and it's a different product choice. Any thoughts there on
Sure.
if we can actually survey for that effectively with our
Yeah.
customers.
Yeah, we call that talking about prices, and there are two ways that you can do it. One is you can talk about prices with your customers, and we're talking about forming focus groups, asking about some key questions. If you had the ability of on the margin reducing your risk with a small but known payment, right? How much risk would you like to see taken away from you, and what are you willing to pay for that? So these are nice. You can get together with randomly selected focus groups that really focus on your rural customers, your urban customers, your industrials, your commercial accounts, however you want to cross section your customers, but form them into focus groups and really get down to the details of talking about prices. The other way that we do it, and this really is important for utilities who have a lot of industrial and large commercial loads, that tend to be highly elastic. And what I mean by that is, that's a fancy geek word, elastic. I mean, we'll just talk about
Price responsive.
yes, right. If you charge me 3.5 cents, I am here forever. If you charge me 5.5 cents, I'm gone tomorrow. And there's something there in between where they're going to start sweating and start thinking about maybe going somewhere else. So you really have to know your customers well. And the best way of doing that is to look around, look at other utilities, start with the ones that are about your size, and take a look at what they're charging their customers and how volatile their rates are. But then go beyond it, go to the larger IOUs and places that are experiencing some significant anomalies in pricing. A lot of people don't realize that if you are in parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, you may actually consistently be paid to take power. It's kind of a hard thing to think about, but there are some places that consistently have negatively priced power. And so, you're kind of up against that, right? You have to ask yourself, what do I have to offer my customers? And do my customers even want to live where I'm serving my load? So I'd start there, to tell you the truth.
It's good. And it's good ways to figure out our risk tolerance, good ways to survey our customers for risk tolerance. Why don't we pivot to the next topic around risk awareness?
All right. Yeah, having discussed the framing for uncertainty and identified our risk tolerance, the next topic we'll discuss is how utilities translate that risk tolerance into strategies for risk management. So we're particularly interested in focusing on instruments for mitigating risk and whether those instruments change if we evolve into a centrally dispatched and or to settlement market. So let's start with you this time, Paul.
Oh, geez, where do you want me to begin? I've got a lot to say on both, but one thing that I really found to be quite interesting when I came to Grant County was the use of slice of system sales that Kevin really was responsible for putting into our portfolio, and not I might be stealing Kevin's thunder, but the cool thing about this is we're exchanging variability in production because obviously we're all just about entirely hydro in our portfolio, and we really are stuck with whatever water happens to be coming down the Columbia. So we've got variable production, but at the same time, our customers are really craving that stability. And so, are there ways that you can actually stabilize your volume, while, maybe exchanging a little bit of the upside to that in exchange for like missing some of the downside, not having enough water. So by selling that variable output and buying back a fixed quantity of power, you end up essentially reducing the risk to the customer to simply price variability, which is kind of cool.
It's super cool. I want to talk more about it. Maybe we can come back to you when we get to the new instruments in a two-settlement market. But I do want to pivot to Kevin to talk about how Grant got to this concept. I think slice of the system is an incredibly useful instrument for hydro generation. Kevin, I once described slice as basically a tolling agreement on a hydro facility. And I want to know if how wrong I was, and anything else you want to talk about how Grant got to the idea of a slice product.
So, at first, I think what I would say is, if your reference of slice is, the Bonneville slice, that's a particular conception of slice. It's not necessarily the only one, right? I'm not saying good, bad, whatever, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
But, I think one of the things, and I'll go back maybe to your last question before we pivoted, not to take us down a bad field, right? You asked like best practices in the utility, biz. And I would suggest, we all could benefit by watching other sectors, particularly things like insurance and the reinsurance industry, right? That is their game. And it takes back to the question here, right? So I came to Grant as the power manager, and, hey, great people, great assets, it's not anything that probably wasn't known. There was some, tension with some of the growth starting. We had some financial challenges. And, there was some general frustration. So sitting down and listening to people, asking them what they want, board members, customers, et cetera, it became very clear to me, well, what you want, is stable and predictable outcomes, right? And okay, what is that? What does that mean, right? I'll draw a picture and tell me, would you like to have an outcome that never varied more than this? And again, it wasn't about the math. Yeah. All right. And there was also push, to reduce liquidity reserves, which were probably skinny at the time anyway. Right. And, so, well, if you want to keep costs low, and cost of money is one of your biggest costs. And if you reduce liquidity, if you reduce your ready reserves, that's going to pressure your credit rating. These things don't coexist, but could, right? And this is where I think one of the things we always have to remember is we can invent instruments, right? So what kind of invented there was, well, I'm going to come back to the meat, right? Mitigate, eliminate, accept, or transfer, right? Well, we have been accepting all this hydro risk, right? But we don't seem to want that hydro risk, right? What we want is the benefit of average water without the variability of the underlying distribution, right? Well, how might we get that? Well, if you look around, there's a lot of folk that don't have really any exposure to hydro, right? And adding some hydro exposure in their portfolio was actually going to be risk reducing for them, and it'll be risk reducing for us. Oh, and it doesn't hurt that we got a lot of flexibility with a nice pond and fast ramping, which brings a premium, right? So looking out at, who's exposed to what in a general sense, what do my customers really want, my board and customers? Well, they want to, sort of have a Sunday driver they can count on every week, but they're not looking for any excitement. Well, here's an opportunity to transfer risk in a way that's beneficial for somebody else, that mitigates ours. As we reduce that hydro risk, it took pressure off carrying as many reserves, right? And, ultimately, as we, proved it out, we basically hedged out all the hydro risk, right? I'm a happy camper to say I haven't looked at a water forecast in 10 years because, every year is average at Grant. Now, that's just an example, right? But it really came from hearing, what is it my main stakeholders were after, and thinking about, well, what's getting me is, all this acceptance and exposure to the hydro variability. How many people have that out in the universe of market participants? Not many. Who could use it, right? And especially around this time was the dawn of, the wind boom, right? And the high wind, high water. Yep. Gosh, sounded to me like there's a lot of people that could use some flexible resource to help mitigate their risks. You don't have water exposure, you need flexibility. I got flexibility, I want to reduce water exposure. Boom, right? If you think like a reinsurance company, and look for opportunities where there's mutual benefit, you can create stuff. And if an off the shelf plain vanilla instrument like a WSPP forward or a fixed for float slot, isn't going to do it for you, then think about how you can invent an instrument that can work good for you, work good for me, right? So
I
Brilliant.
love
that's kind
it.
of the story.
That is brilliant.
Did you have a question, Ahlmahz? Or I wanted to
No,
pivot
I'm
back
just,
to
I just think it's brilliant. No.
yeah, yeah.
Question.
We can invent instruments. There's nothing preventing us from being creative and figuring out strategies to where we have strengths and complement other people's weaknesses, and where they have strengths they can complement ours. It sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons campaign coming up. But I wanted to come back to you, Mr. Dietz, around, in the Northwest, we are thinking about two settlement markets, and there probably are existing instruments that are a little bit different than what we use in the bilateral today, but may not be fully bespoke instruments. Can you talk a little bit about whether there's new ways to manage risk in a two settlement market?
There definitely are. You say new ways that have been around for about 25 years.
New to
but
us,
new to
but
us. It's
not
kind of
new.
yeah, absolutely. And I like to go back to the basics. It's like, what are the real risks that we're interested in managing? If you want to really talk about the two settlement market, one is the risk that we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars, well, we'll just say maybe billions and billions of dollars in transmission to create the world's largest machine ever known, and that's what we have in the WEC. It's a massive machine, and it's one that a lot of people might not recognize is hardly being used. Driven to church on Sundays is about it. Now, this is a radical concept. You say, what are you talking about? We're hardly using our transmission grid, because the fact of the matter is we interact with it based upon these contractual fictions that really have nothing to do with the way that electrons flow. But we're really, really concerned about, well, wait a minute. I'm afraid I'm going to lose access to the thing that I built, this piece of this network, this machine. I want to make sure that I always have access to that. And it's like, well, forget about it. What you really want is to have access to the machine itself. And so the number one risk that we're trying to solve here is donate all of the use of that of all those assets to a regional entity who's going to make that machine hum and be used so much more efficiently. 25 to 30% of the grid is not being used today, and so the biggest benefit and the biggest risk we're managing is by getting that machine to do more for us, which to me is, I think, the job of engineers. I mean, just to be honest. But that is what the two settlement market brings. Suddenly, you have access to more power. You are wasting opportunities far less frequently, and you're trying to get to that magical moment where, on the margin, everyone across this marketplace is paying roughly the same. And so, man, that is super cool. And that's where we have to get to. That is the golden, hoard that we're really trying to get in this Dungeons and Dragons episode, right? You have to slay that fire dragon, and
that's the horde.
Okay. And figure out how to get that horde, and that's what we're doing. But what I usually tell people is, if you want to have a pretty good idea of how to manage the process and the risks of making a market transformation, all you really have to do is look at where it's already happened. So that PJM model is excellent. MISO, SPP, ERCOT has some challenges, but those challenges have a lot more to do with the fact that they're an isolated entity, like an island unto themselves, than that they had anything totally wrong with their market construction. It really had more to do with their isolation. Long story short, though, that is where we're really trying to get to, and I think that's what we are, customers, because ultimately we can bring them more stable rates and not have to say, hey, because we can't really get any power delivered to us somehow from this, South Nevada, we're going to have to build a whole bunch of assets closer to home, and that's going to be more expensive, and that's going to be less efficient, and we're going to have to build even more transmission just to support this thing. Let's fix the real problem. And that's really kind of where I'm coming at it. That's the big story as far as I'm concerned.
So if
I'm gonna have to process that hot take. So you go with your question, Ahlmahz.
am I understanding you correctly with regard to the transmission part, that step involves centralized ownership of the transmission grid? And if so, are you proposing public ownership of transmission?
No, Lord, no. Oh, no, the public can't do that. No, you want to manage risk. You keep that private ownership. You're really just turning over control. So I like the idea that I can go and invest in transmission lines, and I know that the region's going to pay me for my investment. They'll even give me a return on my investment, and that's fantastic. That is using my capital in the most cost-effective way. The real issue here is turning over the control of the asset so that we can actually use the machine the way it's being designed in a more efficient way. So it's really just it's the pilot in essence. We're saying, hey, we don't know how to use this thing. You figure it out, and that's what that regional transmission operator is for.
So one last question. Do you think that it's possible to do that? Because I think people get hung up on the concept of winners and losers, and that once you give up that ownership or that control, there'll be a time when you'll come out on the short end of the stick in that whole greater optimization. Do you foresee that being an issue? And if so, is it just a perceived issue, or is it a real issue?
I think it's all perceived issue, and it's absolutely not a real issue. If you want to know, is it possible to do this, or what people think about doing it, ask the folks in the New England states, ask the folks in New York, in all the PJM states, Pennsylvania, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, all the MISO states, all of the states that are in SPP. All of those folks figured out how to do this, and they realized that, holy smokes, that was the answer. So do I think it's possible? Not only is it possible, but this would be just a repeat of what people have already done. So yeah, there's no reason why we can't get there.
Yeah, maybe if you don't mind, maybe I'll just add, it's the right model because you can get more out of the machine. I wouldn't want to downplay how easy it is given the cultural inertia and all that. So just I think we want to be clear there, right? But one of the things to me I think so is a good one to highlight, Ahlmahz, relative to your question is, life's not static, right? So might I be a loser? Well, what exactly does that mean, right? Am I going to be, if something happens, am I going to be a systemic loser where I'm just going to keep losing for decades going forward? Or maybe relative to where I think I am right now, may I incur, some additional costs so I seem like I'm worse off, right? But what is the horizon to be thinking about there, right? Because it may bring many other opportunities, right? And so, again, well, if we move to this type of arrangement, it seems like maybe my transmission costs may go up. Well, on the other hand, if we can open up access, even without new builds, to resources that otherwise wouldn't have been available because you just didn't have the visibility in the bilateral market, right? When you're thinking winner and loser, are you properly thinking about what that may happen? I think there's always a risk that one can make the winner and loser determination based on sort of where am I standing right now, assuming all else equal now and into the future. But I've rarely found all else equal into the future. And where you said, like, what if I get the short end of the stick? Even the best traders and risk managers probably on the short end of the stick, a third of the time or whatever, right? So again, I think it really comes down to, how do you build strategies and portfolios that mitigate, persistent losses, but one needs to be careful coming to, this idea of error of omission, that maybe you're not thinking about where the world may be going, whether you want it to or not. And how does your current, status quo hold up in that?
Yeah.
It's been super insightful. It's not the direction I thought talking about instruments available in a two settlement market would go. But I think I leave it to Mr. Dietz to elevate the conversation and talk about the major risks. And while I agree that central transmission operations will probably relieve some of the congestion on the grid, I do think there are probably instances within the grid where it will also identify constraints. And I think this gets us back to this theme of understanding your risk tolerance, but then also be aware of what your actual risk is, and participating in something like a regional transmission organization that actually quantifies the congestion locationally is a great risk awareness mechanism. And the transparency of the two settlement market that includes a congestion component on an LMP opens up your ability to mitigate risk because you actually know what your risk is. Whereas today, you just have contract path rights and don't really know. All you have is pro rata curtailment based on priority, not real awareness of congestion risk for your load or resource. I'm going to end these. I think I'm ending all these on a soapbox. This is a new thing for me, I think.
Well,
but this has been really helpful. Did I synthesize that right?
You did. If another way of thinking about it is kind of in the old days, you didn't really know where the ogres were. They were constantly raiding people going up and down the highway and stealing from them, and they didn't realize it. Honestly, it's like you would never hear from these people. They disappear. Where'd the gold go? And so finding where the congestion is kind of like finding out where the ogres are and like taking them out, right? And eliminating them so that they're no longer stealing from you. And I think that's really where we're going with it.
Yep, I love it. Another foreshadowing to our campaign coming up. Okay, Ahlmahz, why don't we pivot to the next section and learn some more.
All right, so to recap, this is the final one, right? So first we talked about putting uncertainty into perspective. Second, organizational and customer risk tolerances. And then of course, we've just now wrapped up translating risk tolerance into strategies for risk management. And this last area of focus are risks that are unique to power supply, especially during the energy transition. So can you walk us through risk-based thinking in the context of power supply? It's operational horizons, planning horizons, dependencies between the timescales, how they may interact, and the perils of errors of emissions. And this time we'll start with you, Kevin.
Okay, thanks, Ahlmahz. And there's a lot there. I know we won't have time to, go deep, nor do myself or Paul, claim that we have all the answers or anything, but we can share a little bit about how we're thinking about things, right? And, kind of this idea of timeframes, I think is, an important thing, and something Paul and I, through brainstorming sessions, or Mr. Dietz, so we don't get confused, around things like, hey, we work in, sort of an incremental way, mostly day to day, right? And as you rightly point out, we've got this big transition coming, right? I mean, it's really big. I've heard over my 30 plus years in this business, what's coming, in 1992, it's the biggest thing ever. In 1997, it's the biggest thing ever. In 2002, the biggest thing ever, right? But I do think, I don't know that I'll say this transition will be the biggest thing ever, but it's probably really big given, huge structural change. And we're talking about doubling the capacity of the WEC, et cetera, right? And so, if we're used to thinking about, not today, but over the last decades, right? Small incremental changes. How do I eke a little bit more value out of, resources in my portfolio? I'll use a calculus analogy, right? We're looking at, infinitesimal changes, trying to move along. And, it really started to occur to us that, with disruptive new technologies, where 15 years ago, we were looking at $450 plus a megawatt hour solar plants, in the Northwest. And now, you're well below that. We've seen a bounce up. We've seen huge opportunities with analytics and demand side management and other things. Where do we need to be aware of thinking like, hey, if I'm too focused on what I'm currently doing and trying to make it just a bit better, are there figuratively non-linearities out there and discontinuities that are going to jump up and maybe eat your lunch, right? I always like to remind, the folk at Grant, we don't want to be Kodak. Hopefully we're not IBM, but at least IBM realized before it was too late, right? And by that, Kodak, we're thinking of protecting the cash cow and how can we, make film a little bit better. We missed the big picture that the world is moving, right? IBM riding a horse of mainframes until Lou Gerstner, an outsider, came in and, you got to get off this or you're going to be dead, right? So that's really kind of what we're thinking about, operational short-term marketing and hedging. There's a lot to think about there, but it doesn't naturally extend itself into a planning horizon and really stepping back and sort of holistically thinking, who knows where the world's going? I certainly don't. But if I try to think about, wild things that could happen, am I going to be robust against those things? And what may be the option that I need to focus? Am I really most worried about, this element of price formation may cost me a little bit in the near term? Yeah, I want every penny, believe me, right? But at the same time, if I'm not thinking, say, perhaps about, the real value of this transition may be able to get a pipe all the way into the Eastern Interconnect and take advantage of a huge diversity of resource. That's the first order win. That small price formation element may actually be a third order issue. Again, not that we don't care about it, but are we focusing on, what might be the big wins? And are we doing that in a way that may be robust? Failure to imagine, failure to think about what could happen and what others are doing around you, could be really costly. And it's easy to get tied up in thinking about how am I going to look a year from now if if the world changes this way? Yeah, but what opportunities might it give me? And how do I capture those? Because again, I got a lot of degrees of freedom there. So.
One of the things I wanted to tee you up on, Mr. Dietz, is Kevin talked a little bit about the failure of omissions and the creativity needed to think about the first order issues first. And it sounds to me, for a field that's filled with engineers, it takes a lot of creativity and maybe outside the box thinking to be a good risk manager. Can you talk a little bit about like what you need to do as an organization to think about risk management outside of just a stochastic model?
Yeah, it takes all types. I'm not an engineer, I'm an economist. And I just happen to love math. I sat with the engineers in the math classes. But
we love to have you. We enjoyed it.
The key there really is, people themselves just naturally creative. It doesn't matter really what you do, necessary for a living. Being exposed to environments that not only require creativity but actually nurture it, cherish it, and support the development of new ideas. That's kind of important if you want to have out of the box thinking. And it's also necessary to come up with solutions that maybe other people haven't thought about. And so I would craft that. One thing that Kevin said, and I want to emphasize, oftentimes we throw out the adequate or the pretty darn good as we're seeking perfection, and in the process destroy the ability to actually give us flexibility and find unexpected results. So a good example would be, let's say that for some reason, we decide that by 2045 we truly want to drive every last gram of released carbon out of our portfolios, but at what cost? right? At ultimately what cost and at what volatility of uncertainty at the other end of this, when we're talking about rates, stability and predictability of our rates. It's like, we really have to think about solving practical problems that are moving in the direction of decarbonization. That's one of the big challenges, one of the big constraints that we're trying to solve for, while at the same time still figuring out ways of better using what already exists, and not abandoning and walking away from perfectly good capital in the pursuit of the next rate case, bulging out our rate bases so that we can make sure that our shareholders are happy. Forget about the customer, forget about stable and predictable. What we really want to do is, what can I get away with? What can I jam into my portfolio? Bad idea, right? I mean, it's just a bad idea, because ultimately you forget about what's really important here. So as we're managing risks, I really think that we need to think about some of the bigger pictures and be willing to challenge our beliefs, right? And how we go about solving these problems.
We had Dr. Emily Grubert and Dr. Frank Incropera on one of our episodes, and Dr. Grubert talked a lot about managing the mid-transition and exactly the dynamics you're talking about, Mr. Dietz, where it's, making sure you're thinking about this transition to a fully decarbonized system and thinking about it as a system, not just power supply, but also homes and transport and your social systems. I wanted to put you on the spot, Ahlmahz, because one of the things I think about a lot is making sure the models we're building and the models we're using allow, like, the outputs are effectively communicated what the scope of the value of that output is, but also making sure we're thinking about systems and our models within a system and where we need to be analyzing outside of that model to make sure we're taking into account that social system. Have you thought about that? Do you have any grand insights into that, Ahlmahz, since we've been doing these things together?
So if I understand your question correctly, are you talking about how our models have to be a bit more integrated and consider things outside of what might be typically, covered in that particular model? For example, the IRP, looking at
like, how are we going to do an IRP when it's like, I got to think about housing, not just power, but housing and transport, and like, what's the most effective way to transport people, not necessarily just how do I deliver an electron to a home? Like, how are we going to do that, Ahlmahz?
First of all, we don't do that unless we know that we need to be doing that. So first, I guess the first step is recognizing that that's something that we even need to do.
We recognize that, right, Ahlmahz? We need to do that, right, Ahlmahz?
Yeah, so call together the stakeholders. That's the next step.
That's right. Well, that was my unfair question of the week. Next up is Ahlmahz's insightful question of the week. We'll hit the typewriter. Next is our TIL segment that I call Ahlmahz's insightful question of the week, because she asks our guests what she calls, quote, unfair questions, but are really incredibly insightful if unfiltered and unscripted. So what do you got for him this week, Ahlmahz?
Yeah, so a minute ago, Paul Dietz scoffed at the idea of public ownership of transmission, and so
I heard that. You need to get him on that.
So this got, we're public power, right? So this got me thinking, Paul. So, like, do you think that there's comparing public power with private power, are there any significant differences in the types or even the magnitude of risk when you compare public power with private utilities, or even in the risk mitigation strategies? Like, are there differences between these two types of utilities?
Yeah, that's a good question. If you look at the history of power, fortunately, this is like modern history. So you don't have to look back very far to find out that it made a lot of sense to electrify the big cities. You can make money, and then full stop. That's it. Yep, nowhere else. So I know of people who didn't, in their families, they didn't get electrified until the late 1930s. So that was probably about 40 years after, maybe more, maybe closer to 50 years after some of the first cities got electric power. So if we think about what that really means, there's always going to be room for public power, for public ownership. And it's going to be exactly where you'd expect it to be, in those places where it's kind of hard to necessarily make that margin. But that being said, politics are always way too close to the public in public power. And oftentimes politics will bind. They'll constrain you from finding good solutions that are maybe more cost effective. And so like any kind of family or a household, diversity is good. And having different sources of capital and having different forces on the allocation of that capital makes for a stronger portfolio. Why is that important from a risk perspective? Well, it does tend to reduce the uncertainty of performance of that portfolio by having a healthy mix. You can see some of the distortions that exist in our industry by looking a little bit south to California, where politics are binding practical solutions, keeping people from being able to actually respond to incentives in ways that are efficient. Oftentimes, the system is creating incentives to, for example, rooftop solar. The distortions at rooftop solar in California are phenomenal. And as an economist, I look at that and I say that's a really odd way of organizing yourself. The wealthiest of the state get a big benefit. The poorest of the state, they have to pay for all the infrastructure. It's not too cool from my perspective, and I think it damages society. But that's what happens when you have politics binding good solutions. So it's healthy for us to mix it up and to have different responses depending on the different needs. I think that
if I were to summarize that into one sentence, are you saying that politics is a risk? It itself is the risk for public power
politics,
in a way that it isn't. Okay.
Often governance, the governance risk of that is it binds us, keeps us from finding better solutions. Yeah.
We're going to have a discussion.
We'll have some offline discussions, but we need to let Kevin in on the unfair question of the week. Kevin's not getting away without answering Ahlmahz's unfair question of the week.
Oh no, I was a little worried there, Ahlmahz. What are you going to bring for us? But I'm eager to jump in here, and I'm probably on the maybe the other side of Paul. Actually, I am a Paul Dietz, and hey, different ideas of what make the world go round, right?
Exactly.
So but I believe there may be political risk and barriers in public power, but I think those exist in private power. I spent, half or more of my career in the private side, and I've come over to the public side, and I've enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time on the private side, right? One of the things that, I think, given they've got a lot of small entities, maybe with some different political views on the public side, at least in the Northwest, what we don't have is some of the regulatory uncertainty that you're faced with on the IOU side, right? And things like, well, you got regulatory lag or disallowance and prudence issues and such, right? So, I don't know that there's any perfect model, but I think, public ownership of, transmission assets and large scale transmission assets can be, a really good thing. And when I say that, that doesn't, eliminate the possibility of, a mixed ownership and development of, some public and private entities. I think thinking about things differently and saying, okay, what may be some of the barriers we're facing here in the Northwest, right? We've got, different state policies, but, with the general theme of being, very aggressive on the types of resources we can bring to bear, right? There's a few options and grants pursuing both, for firm, dependable, clean capacity. But, one of the greatest opportunities is, diversity and managing your portfolio correlation, right? hey, if we got to build a lot of solar or wind or something up in this area, that can actually be really risky. And I think you see that in some of the studies. Look at what PPC and our Northwest River Partner studies showed to replace the lower snakes. Hey, if we could find a way to leverage those expansions without, any one of us taking a big bet. I'm not a big fan of, take a big bet. Let's just assume the place to put a straw in from the Northwest is New Mexico, and that didn't work out, and we bear the costs, right? So, which does take me to the, why I like centralized transmission, development, because I think it reduces both costs and risks over time. But I really think there's a great opportunity for public power and public power in the Northwest. What we don't have, the biggest of us still have relatively small balance sheets relative to, the IOUs. So that is an Achilles heel, but how can we jujitsu that, right? We don't have to deal with multi-state regulators. Nothing wrong with state regulators. I don't mean that in the criticism, right? But we are freer to do certain things, and if we align and partner, we can get that balance sheet half and try to move things forward. And again, if we think about the core of the public power model, we're trying to serve our customers, with what they want, at the lowest cost. Well, if what they want, because they're voting for people that are voting for some of these policies, on average, is these outcomes. Well, if we work together and if we kind of move out of the mindset that what's Bonneville going to do for us, or I wish someone would have built this, and say, we can build this together. I would argue our political and regulatory barriers are lower than the private side. Their capital strength is probably, stronger than us. I think opportunities to team up there, just publics together, or maybe, a mixed public-private, is a great opportunity to try to open up areas where we otherwise wouldn't be. And then, of course, that leads me right back to the two settlement markets, which is, bilateral markets are always going to be incomplete. Anybody that's been a day ahead trader or real time, you're racing the clock, right? You're never going to be able to pursue every last trade. You just don't have the visibility. So, hey, I think there's a golden opportunity, and I said it in SMR space, I believe that, a consortium of publics, few large, maybe with a few small, that's probably, the best place to mine developing an advanced nuclear plant. Because again, some of the freedoms we enjoy when we work together, yes, you've got to deal with some minor differences, but I would argue and bet pretty strongly that, our political barriers are internally going to be lower than those that many of our brethren, in a different sector face.
Thanks, Kevin. Did you feel good about your answers, Ahlmahz?
And I'm happy that I got two ends of a spectrum. So
we did. We got both ends of the spectrum. We're public power underground. So Mr. Dietz took a
kind of
big
felt like
bet
I was in
there.
the middle there. I
Yeah, he took a big bet going against a lot of public power interests, especially when he's on an episode with two entities that serve urban areas. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll close out the episode with an energy-inspired Dungeons & Dragons campaign, and then Mr. Dietz closing thoughts. Public Power Underground is brought to you by NWPPA. The Northwest Public Power Association believes in the power of training and education. Every year, more than 6,500 public power employees learn and network at our classes, webinars, workshops, and conferences. NWPPA offers more than 250 events, wowzer, to choose from in areas such as leadership, engineering, operations, accounting, and finance, communications, and many more. Sometimes this very podcast, Public Power Underground, is broadcast live from one of our events. We call that being more powerful together. What will you learn this year? Find an event that's right for you at nwppa.org/catalog. That's nwppa.org/catalog. Okay, Dungeons and Dragons, the movie, is now available on streaming platforms, and creatively managing risk by leveraging your strengths to maximize the likelihood of beneficial outcomes when solving problems while pretending to be a fantastical character has a lot of similarities to utility planning. I recruited a dungeon master, Ian Bledsoe, to help us facilitate a campaign in 10 minutes or less. He couldn't make it. So instead, we're just going to talk about characters and strategies in a game I'm calling Dams and Distributions.
Okay.
You feel better to get out the name? Ian couldn't make it, unfortunately, but I think it's probably in 10 minutes. Mr. Dietz, it sounds like you actually play Dungeons and Dragons, so it sounds like we wouldn't actually have been able to get through a campaign anyway. So just talking about characters may be the way to go.
Holy smokes! Yeah, no, I mean, just the whole idea. This is marvelous, and given the ascension of the game again, it's fantastic. I hope that we can build upon the theme. But a campaign of this would be like epic. You know, in fact, I think we might be engaging in this campaign right now, you know, over the next 10 years. So
that's right. Like a slow running. I mean, that is Dungeons and Dragons, right? It's just a campaign that takes a decade.
Yeah.
And some people you lose along the way.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're gonna do is I'm gonna try to basically describe some characters. We're gonna go around. People can pick which character they want to be, and then after you pick which character you want to be, we'll talk about just some strategies they could employ as characters within our game of utility planning.
Awesome.
So I had 4 types of characters because I was gonna pick one too, but I'm gonna facilitate as like the dungeon master. That's scary. But I'll describe the 4, and then we're going to go, and we're going to start with Kevin. You're going to pick first, then Ahlmahz, and then Paul, you will get to pick last. I came up with 4 characters, okay? First, a knight with public power armor. And a knight, apparently, in Dungeons & Dragons is called a paladin. Is that right, Paul?
The good ones.
The good ones. Well, this would be a good one because it's public power.
There you go.
So you got a paladin with public power armor, where anytime you get hit, the damage applies equally to everyone else on the campaign. So it's a magical armor. So if you get hit, it's just like it's a pooled risk, and it hits everybody else in your campaign. That's the paladin with public power armor that you could choose. Next, I have a druid with investor-owned potions. So flexible usage for your potions, but a high marginal cost to replenish. Okay, that's the second thing you can choose. The third is a fighter character with a slice of the system sword, which is highly dependent on the constitution and wisdom of the person that's using it. But this sword, the slice of the system sword, can get bigger or smaller depending on how big of an enemy you're facing. Kind of a toka slice of the system sword, and that is for the 4 people who know what a toka is that listen to this podcast. Okay, and the last one, the 4th one you can choose, is a wizard with a pseudo dragon that flies on the wind and breathes fire as bright as the sun. The pseudo dragon is kind of flighty, so you gotta make sure it's around. But when it's around, it's really helpful and really powerful. So those are our 4 characters. We're going to start with you, Kevin. Which character would you choose?
Okay, find the mute button there. All right, well, I guess I get the luck of the draw to go first. So sorry to foreclose some choices on you, Ahlmahz and Mr. Dietz. But without question, I'm right on that druid.
You're right on the druid.
Right on the druid, yes. And it's not given my old investor-owned, my investor-owned history. It's
you like that flexibility?
I'll take flexibility anytime. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, the druid is off the board. I'm coming to you next, Ahlmahz. You got 3 left. You got the holy knight with public power armor.
That's
got
what I want.
A fighter. You want the public power armor?
I want to be. Yeah, I'm the knight.
Okay.
Paladin.
Awesome.
Perfect. I love it. So that means you're down to 2. You can be a fighter with a slice of the system sword, or you can be a wizard with a pseudo dragon, Paul.
So I just want everyone to know I brought with me a certified antique copy of the
Vintage.
Player's Handbook.
Wow.
I think it was published in 1980. So hey, I'm going to be a wizard. I always loved being a wizard, and you know, it's kind of nice to have a sidekick too. So yeah, and now that being said, when you go around breathing fire, you know, you kind of count on resiliency, and so
Oh yeah, you need some resiliency.
yeah, so I'm all about let's get out there and you know, look at our transmission system, you know, worry about maintenance, do upgrades. Let's make it rock solid so we don't end up in court. So that's what I'm going to look for.
Are you saying so when it's breathing fire, it doesn't burn down the village?
Yeah.
Is that what we're doing here? I
Yeah,
love this.
yeah.
This is
And
great.
my little pseudo dragon's going to be going right along all the lines and
There we go.
you know, inspecting them. So
Inspecting lines. Okay, so we can't do a campaign today, but I at least wanted to like figure out and get from each of you like what a strategy would be that you would want to employ in order to play the campaign. The campaign being, I think I missed this part of my notes, but I'm not a dungeon master by training, so it's forgivable. So the campaign would be you have to protect these non-player characters from a horde of frost giants. Frost giants as big as the town, just like Uri was as big as the Texas grid. Our horde, the clan for the Frost Giant horde is named Uri. They're the Uri clan of Frost Giants. So if you were faced with preparing for a possible horde of Frost Giants, any strategies you would deploy for your characters? We'll start with you, Mr. Dietz, because you probably have the most experience and you can draw the others in. Help me out here.
oh geez, you know, I'm going to go with if I'm able, let's see here. Pseudo dragon's able to fly with the wind and breathe fire as bright as the sun. So I'm going to go with establishing
High wisdom, high intelligence as a wizard.
We're talking an SMR. We're talking nuclear power. We're putting it where we need to have it, and we're talking the kind of transmission system that is going to be able to distribute this power cheaply and efficiently across the land. And
so would you join a band of other utilities
absolutely
in a regional, what's
Yep.
a T in Dungeons and Dragons? It would be a clan, a regional.
Oh geez, that would be
That's a good one. Okay, what do you got for us, Kevin?
City
What would
state.
you? A city state, yeah.
All right. Well, you know, in our mythical world here with the frost dragons, which we're all fighting, right?
We're all fighting. Yes, we're all fighting the frost dragons.
Yeah.
You can partner with other characters here.
Yep, yeah, and that's my strategy, right? So, hey, you know, I've got a lot of flexibility, but you know, as you say, high marginal cost. You know, how can I maybe jujitsu that a little bit, right? And there's actually some diversity of between the Paladin and you know, Mr. Wizard there, right? Paul's Wizard, right? So I'd be looking to make an alliance, right?
Well, that's a good
Well,
idea.
hey, Mr. Wizard, you know, I can provide you, you know, with my flex potions, a little bit of backing to maybe firm up some of your stuff for the right to, you know, purchase at, you know, say index minus, which
You could
takes care of me a lot. Oh,
You
and
could
by
use the
way,
flames
you
to make the potions.
know, right. And over there to Ahlmahz and the Paladin and everybody, look, you're all going to take an equal whack,
Yeah.
right? So, you know, you're hostages to each other. Y'all want to, you know, tell you what, let me sell you, you know, an insurance policy here with the right to call when you may be in a pinch. And, you know, I'm not living off my marginal cost at that point. And, you know, I've engineered myself nice little portfolio with a decent expected return that's hedged on both sides. And I made a couple of friends too. I got a new friend, the Paladin and the Wizard. So life is good here.
It's interesting, Kevin, that you chose to partner instead of building your own thing. I think you could have gotten some more points by building your own potion making machine, but you decided to partner because you're risk mitigating for your customers. That's really good.
Yeah, I'm a risk mitigating fella. Plus, you never know when a friend may come in handy. So that
That's
extrinsic value of that friendship option, don't underprice it.
That's a great way of framing a friendship. Ahlmahz, are you going to take Kevin up on his offer for friendship?
Absolutely, because he knew exactly what we were willing to offer, right? So we wanted to lean on the power of community and everybody
Yes.
participating in a little bit of demand response. And so we're all in on this partnership, on this alliance.
Okay. Sounds like a great alliance of a regional city-state organization that leans on each other and mitigates risk with an SMR. What's an SMR in Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, that's magic.
It's just magic. It's just you got a magic spell book, it sounds like.
Must be a breeder reactor, Paul. Everybody thinks that's alchemy, even
though
it's not.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's the game. Maybe someday we can get together. I have a hypothesis that we all talk about, like, what is a board game for electric utilities, and I have the hypothesis that it's actually just a modified Dungeons and Dragons campaign where you're just it's just crazy risks you got to mitigate and figuring out how to deploy strategies to maximize your strength and minimize your weaknesses. What do you think, Mr. Dietz? Having played the game, is this the game? Is this the game for public power or just power?
Absolutely. In fact, I recommend playing D&D so that you can be better at what we do.
Oh, I like it.
Great. You heard it here. You heard it here. Okay. Before we hand it back to Mr. Dietz for his closing thoughts, I just wanted to express my gratitude. Kevin, thank you. I hope you feel valued and appreciated.
Oh, absolutely. This has been wonderful. And again, thank you so much, Paul and Ahlmahz, for the opportunity. And I love what you both do with this. It's just great. Thank you so much.
Yep. I hope this was fun. Mr. Dietz, I hope you feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated. And I hope you had fun.
Oh, boy, this is wonderful. I really did have a lot of fun. And just to set the story straight here, I'm a big fan of public power.
Good. That's an important clarification. Important clarification at the end there.
Never doubted it for a minute, Paul.
But that's the sneaky thing about diversity of opinion. You gotta envision a world differently. You gotta come at it from right angles to get good solutions. So
I love it. I really appreciated your perspective, and I appreciate you coming here. Ahlmahz, was this fun for you? Do you feel seen, heard, valued, and appreciated?
Absolutely, always, Paul.
Okay, that's all the energy and energy adjacent topics we're covering this week. Next up, we're closing out the episode with closing thoughts from Paul Dietz.
Well, what did we learn today? Well, I think risk management don't mean a thing if it ain't got that ring of power. It also helps if it's used to solve practical problems with consistent metrics that are tailored to meet our customers' needs. We call that the risk trifecta. Risk management has to be practical, has to be consistent, and it has to be useful. With these, we can make risk-informed decisions about how best to deal with the opportunities and threats we will encounter as we carry on our adventure into the market transformation, carbon management, and heretofore unheard of demand growth as decarbonization occurs almost everywhere. I recommend that we all buy ourselves new sets of dice. You know the ones, D20, 12, 10, 6, and a D4, because we're going to need to do an awful lot of rolling before our adventure ends.
We started in hard times to bring us all into the laughter through thick and through thin for public power.
Public Power Underground is a production of Seattle City Light and News Data. The views expressed here are own and not the official views of Seattle City Light, Tacoma Power, News Data, or the organization of the guests also appearing on Public Power Underground. Public Power Underground is electric utility and electric utility adjacent news from a power department's perspective. Today's episode was written and produced by Paul Dockery, Ahlmahz Negash, Alan Bach, Sean Dockery, and Ian Bledsoe. And it's edited and published by the stellar team from Pioneer Utility Resources, with sound mixing by Lucas Smith and video editing by Brendan Delzer. Our theme song, Roll On Enthusiasts, was rewritten, performed, and recorded by Aaron Guillory and Ian Bledsoe. You don't have to be subscribed to News Data's weekly newsletter to get this podcast, but it sure makes the podcast make a lot more sense. Public Power Underground for electric utility enthusiasts. Public Power Underground, it's work to watch.